everyone, welcome back for another video. If you're new here, my name is Tonya, and today we're going to be talking about all of the books that I read in the month of November. It was a pretty good reading month for me. I finished 7 books, 6 of those being physical or ebooks, and 1 of those being a very long audiobook. So grab yourself a tasty beverage, maybe a snack. Sit back, get cozy, and let's talk all about the books I read last month. So before we get into the actual books, I just wanted to share a few little stats. First, I read 2,736 pages, which is pretty good. I do work a full-time job and also operate a small business and then do my book channel on top of that. So I don't always have the most time for reading, but I do try to read some every day. So I was pretty happy with that page count. And then I also listened to 40 hours and 34 minutes of audiobooks. And that was 1 book. It was a very long book. So definitely took me a little while to get through it because I don't listen to things sped up. I listen to them at their actual, just regular speeds. It was truly 40 hours of listening. And then I did also have 2 5-star reads in November. So now let's jump into the books. So first we're going to talk about an arc that I read, and that was I, Medusa by Ayanna Gray. And if you like any sort of Greek mythology or anything like that, then this would be a book for you. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 3.75. So overall, a really good book. And we're following Medusa kind of pre-Snakes on the Head. So we're getting her kind of origin story, and I thought it was a really interesting take on Medusa's kind of beginnings. When we meet her, she is a young woman. She is, I believe, around 17 or so. She is the only mortal in a family of gods. So she's always felt like a bit of an outsider from her parents who are both gods and from her sisters who are both goddesses. And just knowing that someday she will in fact die. She was definitely more humane and aware of her morality than her parents and siblings were. Her family and friends call her Medi, which really gets you into that mind frame that, this is a young woman. She's a little more on the naive side. She doesn't necessarily know much about romance or how the world works. She's grown up and lived on an island in the ocean her entire life. So then one day she meets Poseidon. And as you can imagine, Poseidon, being the Greek god that he is, has kind of an overwhelming presence. And she catches his attention, and she also catches the attention of Athena, and she actually gets asked to come be an alkalot at Athena's temple. So she starts to grow and spend time there and become more familiar with the world around her. And she has kind of this on-again, off-again relationship, not necessarily a physical one, but a budding relationship with Poseidon, who she sees from time to time. And then the story kind of just develops from there. I just thought it was just a really interesting twist on the story we all know of Medusa. So like I said, I gave this one a 3.75. It was good. I thought it dragged a little bit at times, and there were points where it did feel a little young, and I'm sure part of that was just the author trying to play up the naive side of Medusa so that we really kind of got that feel for her frame of mind as she's going through and, having new experiences and meeting new people. But it did just feel at parts a little young for me. Now that being said, there is some talk of abuse and some a little bit darker topics in this book, so that's something to be aware of. I think the author handled them really well, and the fact that, she gave you the feel for how these things happened, but it wasn't too descriptive in nature. So that was a plus, but I also think it may have brought up the maturity level if we got a little more details about those. I don't need the full details, but maybe just a little more of her feelings and reactions and a little just deeper emotional level on some of the topics that were brought up. but definitely check this one out if you like Greek mythology. The next we're going to talk about my lowest rated book of the month. Now, it's still 3 stars, so not bad, but I was kind of disappointed because I've heard such good things about this book, so I was really expecting it to hit me harder than it did. So that's kind of why it was a little bit lower rated for me. And that book is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. And this is a book that's kind of outside of what I usually read. It's more of a literary fiction. And I definitely noticed that there was a slower pace in it than what I'm used to with a lot of the fantasies that I read. And I did find some of the emotional elements to be pretty predictable. Like, you're going to know the path this book is going to go on. There aren't very many surprises that happen in this book. The most interesting thing about this book is Marcellus, who is an octopus at an aquarium. And we do get his point of view. And I liked his points of view the best out of anything in this book. And if you're not familiar with the story, we're following Tova, who is an elderly woman who has lost both her husband and her son. She lost her husband in the last year or two to cancer, and then her son died tragically as a teenager, and she's never really been able to get over and move on from her son's death. It's something she's always carried with her. And then once her husband passed away, she needed something to kind of fill her time, and she ended up taking a job cleaning at the local aquarium, and that is where she meets Marcellus. So there's a lot of different family dynamics that go on in this book, and Marcellus is a bit of a detective, and he helps Tova find out what really happened to her son. And that part of the story, you know, I found it really heartwarming, very engaging, but it was some of the other parts of the stories that I felt like was a little bit surface level, a little bit predictable, and it just wasn't my favorite book. It was good, it wasn't great. I know they're making a movie of this, so it would be interesting to see how the movie compares to the book. I have a feeling I'll probably like the movie better because we're going to get maybe a little better feel of some of those emotions, seeing the people on screen instead of it feeling so surface level, but we shall see. So that was my take on this one. Then next up, we're going to talk about The Demon Awakens, which is the first book in the Demon Wars saga by R.A. Salvatore. And as I've mentioned before on my channel, I am a big fan of R.A. Salvatore's writing. I've read a lot of his Forgotten Realms books and his Dritz Duerden books, and that's where I'm most familiar with his writing. So this one was interesting because we were in a different world than the one we are typically in for the Forgotten Realms books. So there was a lot of world building and getting to know our characters. And there were a few different reasons that I landed on a 3.75 instead of a 4. It did drag a little bit at times, and we led up to this big event at the end, and it just didn't go off as I expected it. So I'm gonna have to see how the second book starts. There was some characters that just took a trajectory that I didn't think the book was gonna go with, so that dropped it down a little bit for me. Our main point of view in this book is L. Brian. And when we first meet L. Brian, he is a young boy in a village called Dundalis. And he is one of the older children that is living in this particular town. He's close to being considered an adult in the eyes of the village, which, I mean, being called an adult means you're like 14, 15 years old. You're still very young. But that's the point where he would be able to go out, and when the village goes to hunt, he would be able to go with the other men when they go hunting and kind of, you know, help with guard duties and things of that nature. And he's kind of looked at as the leader of the children in this particular town. And the men are currently off hunting. So he and his best friend named Pony, which is a girl, Pony is not her actual name, but that is what he calls her. They've been going and waiting and watching to see when the hunters will return every day for a few weeks. And that's kind of where we start this book. And then something really tragic happens where the village is attacked, which is not a spoiler. That happens at the beginning of the book. And it's basically destroyed. Elbrian ends up being taken by the elves, and he stays with them for many years, learning different things like their culture, their language, fighting styles. And Pony also survives, but they get separated, and her life is vastly different from the way Elbrian's goes. She suppresses a lot of her memories from this horrific day when their village is destroyed, and she ends up, a stranger takes her under his wing and takes her back to one of the bigger cities that is in this particular realm and kind of adopts her. And she grows up with this family working in a tavern, not remembering who she is or where she came from, and just knowing that something horrible has happened in her past. And then kind of our big bad in this particular book is the demon, the Dactyl. And basically it is this demon that he only shows up when mankind becomes too greedy, lies too much, is harmful to others. Once the unrest in the world gets big enough and people get corrupted enough, then the Dactyl returns. And we've reached a point in society where the Dactyl is returning, and the book kind of just goes off on a quest to try to at first learn more about the Dactyl and learn more about the Dactyl and why this demon is doing what it's doing and how they can destroy it. So overall, a pretty good book. I will continue with it. Depending on how the second book goes, will let me know if I'm going to read the whole series or if I'm going to stop after book 2, but I am intrigued enough to go on with the series. Then next up, I read The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. So this was another epic fantasy series that I started, and this, out of the 2 that I did read in November, was my favorite series. So this is part of the Bloodsworn saga, which I have the worst time pronouncing. I don't know why that is, but it's really hard for me to say. But anyway, I gave this book 4 stars. It was the first book in a series, so there was a lot of world building, as there is with any first book in an epic fantasy series. But I did quickly get into the world and grew to really like the 3 different points of views that we were following, which is always nice when you can instantly be invested in all 3 points of view. Usually, there's always one that's your favorite and maybe one where you're like, you don't really care too much for it, but I really liked all 3 points of view. We were following a serf, a mercenary, and a former warrior who has become a mother, and she's now living out in the wilderness with her family. And in this particular realm, the gods are dead. They had a great epic battle. All of the gods, save one, were killed. One was imprisoned, but everyone else was killed. So there's really no sort of gods or deities left in this particular world. But there are people who have remnants of the old gods in them who are considered tainted. And basically all that means is they have some sort of special ability from the gods, being magic or strength or speed. They have something that is tying them to the old gods. And that's really frowned upon in this particular world. A lot of the tainted are enslaved or turned into serfs, and they don't get to have any freedom because people want their abilities. But they basically feel like it's their right to take advantage of and enslave these individuals who have these other gifts just because of how bad the old gods were. We essentially follow our 3 different characters as an evil starts to spread across the realm. And lots of different things happen in the book. And of course, we keep building and building to learn more about this great evil. And our characters all end up kind of traveling toward where this great evil is happening. And at the end of this book, they're still not together, but you can kind of see how the paths of these three main characters start mingling and becoming one unit. So overall, I really liked it. Dynamic characters, great world building. It does have some kind of Germanian tribe references in it. There is a glossary, which is good because there was words I didn't know what they were and had to look them up, but did really enjoy it. I have the second book on my TBR for December, and I'll definitely let you know more about the series once I finish that one. Then before we get into the last two physical books that were the 5 stars, we're going to talk about the audiobook that I listened to this month. And that was The Primal of Blood and Bone by Jennifer Armentrout. And I had been really looking forward to this book because it was supposed to be the conclusion of the Blood and Ash series. And plot twist, in case you were not aware like me, apparently this was no longer the last book. So I didn't know that until we were getting close to the end, and I'm like, there's no way the book can end because nothing's been resolved. Literally nothing had been resolved in 40 hours of listening. So after I started getting so close to the end, I learned there's going to be a 7th and an 8th book. So that was extremely disappointing for me. And for that reason, I landed on a 3.5 for this book. And here's kind of why. I really did want to know the end of this story. I enjoyed the 5 books before it, but essentially in this book, for 40 hours of listening and a 1,000-page book, we're just kind of having conversations and getting reacquainted with people, which a lot of the series is like that. And it's something that I do enjoy in this particular series because what makes it is kind of the banter and the interaction of the characters. But we like barely made any progress on the plot in a 40-hour audiobook. And that was a little bit on the excessive side for me. Now, the 7th book is supposed to finish Poppy's story, which is what we're still following in this book. And then the 8th book is supposed to be in her sister's perspective, who we've met in one of the earlier books. But yeah, I listened to a 40-hour audiobook that resolved nothing and then learned there's 2 more books after that. So yeah, I mean, if you're already reading this series, I think you're going to want to read this book as well and then hang out for the last 2. But if you haven't started this series, I don't know that I would recommend it at this point based on how the 6th book went. And now we have, who knows what's going to happen in these last 2 books. I really feel like everything should have been able to be tied up in a 1,000-page book. But it wasn't. So I did still enjoy the book. They've kind of got me at this point, so I am going to go ahead and finish. But yeah, I was pretty disappointed that this didn't finish out the series. And now on to my top 2 books of the month, which I gave 5 stars to both of these books. And the first one being The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. And this just was such a great book. Rachel Gillig just has the most atmospheric, kind of moody, whimsical writing, but whimsical with an edge. It's not all rainbows and butterflies, but there's some sort of elements of whimsy in all of her books, along with the gothic feel, which I think is just really kind of an interesting combination of a writing style. I read the Shepherd King duology in October. I gave both of those 5 stars. I picked this one up in November. I flew through it, absolutely loved it. I laughed in the book. There's some really witty humor in it. I cried quite a bit in the book and just really enjoyed the way this story shaped up. So in this book, we're following Six, and she's something called a diviner. So basically, she has prophetic dreams once she gets drowned in a stinky stream, which is an interesting concept. But that's essentially what happens. And then she sees visions or dreams of, how your favor is with the different omens that are kind of like the gods or deities of this particular kingdom. And besides Six, there are 5 other diviners, and they all kind of came to be a group at the same time. They're considered foundlings, so they're orphan children. And then once they've done 10 years of service as diviners, then they are free to go out into the world and live their life as they would like to. So as they are at the end of their 10 years, the diviners slowly start to disappear, and no one knows what's going on. Six is very upset about how this is happening because the other diviners are essentially her family, and they all wanted to go out after their 10 years of service was up and live together and start to experience life and just, act how a family would act. But as more and more of the diviners disappear, Six comes to recognize that something is not right. She tries to tell the woman who kind of watches over the diviners that, that something's wrong. She doesn't know why they're missing. They didn't run away. Someone needs to go get help so they can figure out what's happening to the other diviners and get them back safely. Well, as things progress in this story, Six ends up in the company of the young king who has just been crowned and some of his guards, one of which being a knight named Roderick. And they basically made an agreement with Six that if she helps them find the omens and the different artifacts that they have, that they will in turn help her find the other diviners. Now, in the mix of all of this, and as she's traveling around with the king and his knights, there is also a gargoyle from the cathedral that Six is from that is traveling with them, and his name is Bartholomew. He's one of my favorite characters in the book. He is a gargoyle who can talk, and he has a lot of humor, a lot of caring. He's just a great side character in this book, so you will absolutely love Bartholomew. And this book did indeed end on a crazy plot twist. I bawled my eyes out and bawled for quite some time after I did finish it. I just, was so invested in our characters that I the way it ended was rough on my poor little heart. But, it just kind of adds to what's going to happen in the next book. You can see glimpses of how we get to this plot twist as we go along. So I wouldn't say it's like completely unexpected, but it was definitely still heartbreaking all the same. I will most definitely be continuing this series. I probably will pick up anything Rachel Gellig writes at this point. So now I just have to attempt to be patient until September when we get the next book. And then my final 5-star read was Holly by Adeline Grace, which is a novella from the Belladonna series. And this was such a good book. If you love the Belladonna series, this is a must read. It has all the holiday vibes. It has Adeline Grace's kind of atmospheric, moody gothic writing in it with that holiday flair tied into it. And we just get to hang out with our favorite characters. And there is, of course, a mystery for Signa to solve, which is kind of what happens in the other books of the Belladonna series. If you're not familiar with the series, we're following a young woman named Signa. She's around 19 or 20 when the books take place, and she has been followed by death her entire life. And not just death in the sense that people around her who she's cared about and her family have died, but also in the fact that she can actually see Death and talk to him. So Death does play a character role in the series. Silas, who is Death, is one of my favorite characters in the book, and there's always some sort of mystery that Signa has to solve. So, there's little murder mystery, plot twist kind of elements, while still having like a gothic feel because of, Signa's particular powers and her relationship with Death. So it's a really fun series, and I kind of flew through it. The audiobooks are also great if you're more of an audiobook person. But I definitely laughed and cried in this book. And I know it's a book I'm going to come back to holiday season after holiday season and reread because it was just so enjoyable. And then at the end of this book, you do kind of get a little teaser about where Adeline Grace will go someday. She hasn't, announced a release date or anything like that, but where the next book in the Belladonna series will go. So that was also really exciting to have kind of that teaser of things to come. But overall, like I said, really enjoyed it, 5-star read, and would highly recommend. Just make sure, don't read this before you've read the other books in the series, because this will spoil those books for you. But if you've already read the other books, then you gotta pick this one up. All right, and that is everything that I read in the month of November. Overall, a pretty good reading month in my opinion, and I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me as we talk through the books that I did read this month. I want to know down in the comments what was your favorite book that you read this month, or you can just leave me a Christmas tree emoji to let me know you were here and you stayed to the end of the video. So if you did enjoy this video, I hope you'll subscribe and become part of my community here on YouTube. Take care, keep reading, and I'll catch you in my next video. Bye!